So, welcome everyone to Israel and the Jewish People, a Divine History, Part 2. And this talk is dedicated in loving memory of Tamara Bat Yosef. And it's also dedicated as a merit for all the people of Israel. And we want to thank Dr. Eleanor Gudis for making this possible. We really appreciate her sponsorship and support. May it be a bracha for her and for her family, and also for Klal Yisrael. Okay, so last week, 2 weeks ago, we got up to the part of our history where Moses died, and Joshua was now the leader of the Jewish people. And there was such a yearning to get to Israel. And we know that Moses never made it there. He wasn't allowed to come to the land. And the reason our sages tell us is because if he had, the redemption would have happened immediately, and we needed to go through various steps in order to have the redemption be complete and full. That's one point of view. There are others we won't discuss today. So Joshua was he was a tzaddik. He was a Torah scholar. He was a leader, and he was a general. And in the year 2488 in the Jewish calendar, which is 1273 BCE on the non-Jewish calendar, he brought the children of Israel into what was then Canaan. And they were commanded by Hashem, by God, in the Bible, in the Torah, to conquer and rid the land of the Canaanites. Now, who were the Canaanites? They were composed of 33 different mini kingdoms. They were not a people. They were just called Canaanites because the way they lived there, just the same way you'd call people from New Jersey, New Jerseyites, but they were a separate people. And these Canaanites were idol worshippers, and they were the descendants of Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons. And some of Ham's descendants also populated Ethiopia and Egypt at the time, but we're going to concern ourselves with Canaan. Now, the Torah, the Bible specifically says in Leviticus 18:3, to not do as the dwellers of Canaan. And the Rambam, Maimonides, explains that they were more degenerate than the Egyptians. They were very, very corrupt and immoral. And they violated every ideal of morality. Now, the prophet Hosea says that they were filled with deceit and dishonesty. They were tribes that would lie, no holds barred. That was their quality, their characteristic. Now, the Torah mentions some of these tribes by name in Genesis, but as I mentioned, by the time Joshua conquered the land, there were 33 different kingdoms. Reb Nosson of Breslov explains to us why these tribes had to be there in our Holy Land. We know the Holy Land was already given to Abraham. We know that Yitzchak, that Isaac never left the Holy Land. We know that Jacob stayed a good portion of his life in the Holy Land. Why did it have to be given to these people? So Reb Nosson explains that Canaan was a type of klipa, a type of peel or husk, which had to conceal the holiness. And the only way to peel off the inedible unholy peel that's only worthy of being composted is, and to get to that beautiful, luscious fruit, is through this idea of humble submission. And he explains it to us. The same Hebrew letters, the same Hebrew consonants that spell Canaan, also spell Hachna'ah, which is humble submission. Hachna'ah, excuse me. And in order to acquire this land, the Jews had to be in a place, the children of Israel had to be in a place where they were genuinely going there for the sake of God. And that's why there was a delay for them to go there, as we know in the beginning. We know the past history in the desert. Okay, so King David tells us in Psalm 37, verse 11, that the humble will inherit the land. Okay, and that is a type of prophecy, and it explains to us that only humble people can live in Israel. Now, we see, we know Israelis, some of them are a little arrogant. What does it mean to be humble? And what does it mean to acquire the land? So it means to be humble is to understand that the only reason to be in the land is to connect with Hashem, to connect with God, to do his will, and to enjoy the land, true, and to nurture the land, true, but to do it with the understanding that we are commanded to do it by Hashem, not just because we like it, because it's pretty, okay, or because it has beaches, or because it's sunny. Okay, these are all nice things, and they're bonuses. Okay, in my opinion, I love sunny weather. Okay, so finally, after Moses and died, Joshua took the Jews across the Jordan River into Canaan. And that was, as I mentioned, in the year 2488. And the Jordan River miraculously was stopped mid-flow during the crossing, and all of Canaan had heard about it. They then camped at Gilgal, which was near Jericho, and they all did Brit Milah. They all circumcised themselves. They were not able to do it in the desert for a variety of reasons. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, was set up in Gilgal. And if you'd like to learn more about details of the Mishkan, which is many books of the Torah are devoted to it, you can look at my series, The Radiant Torah, also sponsored by Dr. Eleonora, and especially the Torah portion of Teruma. Okay, so they then offered the inhabitants, the Canaanites, a peace treaty under commandment from God. What was this treaty? The treaty was like this to each of the kingdoms. If you give up idolatry and make peace with us, you can stay. If not, we're going to get rid of you, or you can leave. So the Girgashites surrendered and they moved out of the land. They didn't want to give up idolatry. The Gibeonites agreed to a peace pact, and they agreed to giving up idolatry, and they were allowed to stay. The 31 other kingdoms didn't just surrender or sit there, they attacked. However, Joshua and the Jews were able to completely get rid of them. Okay, now there was one more group called the Jebusites. Whether they fall under the heading of Canaanites or not, I don't know. I saw two different opinions, but they were not attacked by Joshua at the time. They were told not to attack them. We'll get to them at another time. So this is the opposite of our multicultural melting pot ideals today. Why couldn't these people stay? They were doing, they were living their lives. Let's say that they weren't violent. Why couldn't they just stay? So in lesson 20 of Likutei Moharan, Rabbi Nachman explains that the land is at a different level than any other land. It's at a higher level. Every grain of sand in the land of Israel is holy. So why is it holy? So for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is because all of the other lands are ruled by a sar. They are ruled by an angel, okay? Each of the 70 nations, but the land of Israel is ruled by God alone. And that's why when people go to Israel, it's called Aliyah. It's called going up. Because not because the land's so high on the earth, but it's not Mount Everest, but because going up there means that we are going up spiritually when we go to the land. And Rabbi Nachman explains that when we go to Israel, wherever we're at, okay, we must increase our study of Torah and the mitzvahs, the mitzvot that we do. So wherever you're holding here, everyone is obligated, no matter who they are, to increase in these two areas in Israel. It's very easy to do there because there's many, many Torah classes going on. And everybody's busy doing mitzvot, okay? It's not that difficult to increase. And the reason is, this is very, very important, especially to increase the Torah learning, is because the more Torah learning that's done in the land, says Rabbi Nachman, and of course his sources are Kabbalistic and Talmudic, the more angels are created through this Torah learning, which give the Jews the power to overcome our enemies. Okay. So this is why throughout our history, we have Jews dedicated to learning around the clock. The same way people say Psalms around the clock. There's a lot of Tehillim group. You see them right now. Everybody's jumping in, and somebody's getting this period of time to say Psalms, and somebody's getting the next period for the safety and protection of and the victory of the Jews of Israel. So the same with Torah learning. And so we also have that today going on. It's just not as popular. People maybe don't point it out in WhatsApp groups and so on, but it's being done. And it's taken very seriously because this has been our tradition since Joshua stepped foot in the land. Okay, this is what protects us. And as a matter of fact, during the wars in Israel, and we won't go into too much detail about this aspect of them, but there were Torah scholars assigned to sit and learn Torah, while some people fought with weapons, some fought with Torah. Okay, all right. Now, the conquest of Canaan took 7 years. And then they spent 7 years dividing up the land by tribe. And I'm going to show you a map. Hold on one second. So this is Israel after Joshua conquered it. And I will tell you that I saw a few different maps. And hopefully this is the most accurate. There were arguments between people about which was most accurate. I chose this one. Okay, so we have the tribe of Dan, we have Naphtali, we have Asher, we have Zevulun, we have Yissachar, we have Manasseh, we have Gad, which you can see that God is west of the Yarden, west of the Jordan. Also, Ruvain is west of the Jordan and south and west of the Jordan. And west of the Dead Sea. Okay, we do not have this land today, obviously. We have Yehuda, okay, which is Judah, or could be called Judea, depending how you pronounce it. We have Benjamin, where Jerusalem and Jericho were, and Ephraim. So this is how the map looked when the Jews came in the first conquest from the desert. Okay, I'm going to continue. So after this period of 7 years and dividing up the land, and I want to mention the land wasn't just divided up by lots or anything like this. It was divided up based on Torah wisdom, which tribe was supposed to get which part based on all the blessings of the Torah. Okay. So after this period, Joshua moved the tabernacle to Shiloh, which is near Shechem, okay, which we know from the Torah. And that Shechem, the Romans named it Neapolis, okay, or Neapolis. I don't know how they pronounced it, but I'm assuming Neapolis. And the Arabs, who later conquered the land, occupied our land, they condensed the name to Nablus. So they don't have a P sound. They have a B sound or an F sound, but not a P. Both those sounds connect to the P. So they chose Nablus. So they could have easily called it Nablus, but they called it Nablus. And the Mishkan stayed there for over 300 years. And because the presence of Hashem, the presence of God, was so obvious during this time, most sources say it was a period of 369 years, Israel was never attacked during this period. Not anything meaningful. Okay, maybe minor skirmishes. Okay. Now, why was the presence of God so palpable? That's because this first generation and their descendants were steeped and immersed in Torah learning and mitzvot. They didn't waver, okay, which is quite amazing, because you know that if you put a group of Jews together, you're going to have them doing a lot of different things and a lot of different ideas about what should be done. They were unified in this, despite the fact that they were divided by tribe. There was a unity of purpose, and the purpose was to connect to God and to serve him in the land. Okay, they viewed it as a great gift. And during this period too, the Jews had no king. What they had was judges, okay? And the period of judges began after Joshua died. And the rule of judges began in 2533 by the Jewish calendar and 1228 BCE in the secular non-Jewish calendar, okay? And the Judges was a very interesting period, and each of you hopefully has a Tanakh, a complete Hebrew Bible at home. Certainly worth reading about the Judges. We know there was even a female judge, Deborah, right, Deborah. And the Judges were two things. They were warriors and they were prophets. And they were very, very strong morally, and they were warriors, so they were strong physically as well. The Talmud calls the book of Judges the book of the straight or the upright, because the ultimate time of the period of the Judges is where Jews wanted to do the right thing. And as a matter of fact, during the time of the Judges, yes, people could go to the judges, but there was tremendous autonomy. It's quite amazing if you think about it, that the goal of every Jew was to use his free will to look into Torah and to work out what was the right path for him to take and what was the wrong path for him to take. And this is a little more than astonishing when you think about it, because each of us today finds ourselves in a situation where unless you're very strongly attached to one community and one Rav, most Jews are not. So what do? So we look into Torah, we look into the teachings of the tzaddikim. Okay, we look into the teachings of Rabbi Nachman and others, and we look into the Torah itself, and we look into the Talmud, and we try to decide what is the right path. And of course, this isn't easy, but back then people were steeped in Torah. So they had the answers a little closer to them. It was a little easier for them to get the answers perhaps than today. So as a matter of fact, in Judges, it says, the verse in Judges that describes this, it says, in those days, there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in his eyes. And also, I want to also really, really emphasize that there was no anarchy, okay? People didn't just start splitting apart. There was such unity, such achdut, okay, which we are seeing today in Israel. We're seeing it from the Jews outside of Israel too. We're seeing people coming together in the face of a common enemy, okay? All right. And what happened that things changed, okay? We had this long period, we had 17 different judges. We were told that some of the judges were greater than others because different generations deserved different types of judges. What changed? Why was that period ended? And it ended, by the way, with the prophet Shmuel, the prophet Samuel. So why did it end? Because the Jews began to fall from their spiritual level. Their commitment waned, okay? And that there were chinks in the armor, okay? We could even envision this as a spiritually protective bubble around us from the merit of all the Torah that is learned, all the prayers that is said, all the mitzvot that are done, all the charity that is given. And when we let up, there's a chink in the armor, which is why today when people look in their personal lives to solve a problem, they ask for what should I do? What should I take on? What mitzvah should I improve in? Okay. And the same way today we see with what's going on in Israel, everybody's driving themselves to find another mitzvah to do. What else can I do? What else can I give? Because instinctually, we understand that we need to strengthen ourselves spiritually in the face of enemies. Every Jew understands this. Okay, I'm seeing this like miracles. It's quite incredible, and it gives a lot of hope and positivity to this very dark and difficult time that we are going through. Okay, so let me okay, we're going to go to Samuel. Okay, and Samuel or Shmuel became the leader of the Jews. He was a prophet, and David was born. He was born actually before Samuel became leader, and he became leader in 2871. Hold on, I have several different charts here with dates because not everybody agrees on the dates either. So I'm cobbling them together and choosing what I think is the most accurate according to Jewish sources. Okay. So the Jewish people have had no real central leadership for a period of almost 400 years. And they really couldn't continue like this. It just wasn't working anymore. So Samuel would travel the land and he himself would adjudicate situations that arose. Everybody has a situation. My neighbor, he built a fence on my land. I went into business with that guy and now the partnership is dissolving and so on, just like people have today. And he would adjudicate that. And finally, when he grew older and it was difficult for him to run all over the country, what a special person, what love for the Jewish people to do that, the tribes asked him to appoint a king or to anoint a king instead. And this was very upsetting to Samuel, to Shmuel. He didn't want to do it. And he didn't want to do it because he understood that the Jews are not a nation like every other nation. and that if they were supposed to appoint a king, Hashem, God, would have told them to appoint a king when they conquered the land. They were not commanded to do that at that time. And he understood that, we shouldn't look like the other nations. Okay. We shouldn't model our governments on the other nations. For example, Israel has a parliamentary system, which is based on the British system. This is today, obviously, based on the British system. And that's because Great Britain was, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I thought I turned my phone off. I apologize. Great Britain was controlling the land at that point after the very long Turkish occupation of the land before 1948. And so Israel adopted this parliamentary system. Now, we could argue whether the American system's better, the Swiss system's better, the British system's better. They're all, whatever they are, they all have their flaws and they all have good points, but they are not Jewish. They don't come from the Torah. However, Samuel, being a prophet, heard from God, and God told him, you know what? Go ahead and find a king for the people. So he did. And this is how the time of the judges came to an end. It was going to now turn into a kingship. And Samuel ruled for 13 years along with the first Jewish king, who was, Shaul, or Saul in English. Okay. Now, we learn about Shaul and King David, very, very important. But I don't want to go into detail here because you can look at my videos, Psalms for Life, the series. And you can see a lot about the life of I'm so sorry, I thought I turned this off. I'm just shutting it down. I thought I turned all the sound off. We're going to you can look at my series and learn about Shaul and David and their relationship and what happened and so on. And it's important. Why? Because these are our ancestors. These are our forefathers. These are our great-grandparents. So we should know their story. We really should know their history. And the history comes from Tanakh, okay? It comes from the Hebrew Bible, okay? And also the Talmud. Now, David was a very great Torah scholar. We must know that first and foremost about him. That's what our sages say. He was a tzaddik. He was a very righteous, holy individual. He was a warrior. He was a king, and he was a judge. He had it all. And he built Jerusalem, and he named it. He drove out those people, the Jebusites. He got rid of them. Now, Jerusalem, we all know from the last one of this series, we all know that Jerusalem was already a very special place. And we learned that in the 5 books of Moses and through the story of creation. And David knew that this is where the capital should be. And he named it Yerushalem. Okay, Yerushalayim, but we can condense it to Yerushalem, 2 words. What do those 2 words mean? So the first word, Yeru, okay, comes from Yira, which means fear and awe. It means awe and reverence and just beyond, okay, our feelings and intellectual understanding of God, because we can only go so far. So therefore we have fear and awe of him. And Shalem means shalom. It means peace. And in order to have this perfection and this wholeness of peace, there must be reverence for God. And David knew this, and this is how Jerusalem got the name. Okay. So the etymology is so important, and we have to pay attention to it, especially with the place names of Israel, because they give us so much clues like this just did. And it's the place, Jerusalem is the place where a person experiences awe of Hashem, awe of God at all times. If they don't, it's because they're not open to it. But if you're at all open to it, you will experience it. Every step will be like stepping in the Garden of Paradise. It will be a very incredible feeling for everybody. And also this feeling of great reverence and awe. Now, who has this perfected fear? Okay. The prophets had it. The tzaddikim had it. And sometimes we get glimpses of it, as I just described, we get glimpses of it walking in Jerusalem. However, when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, we are going to feel this awe and majesty of Hashem, just like we do in Jerusalem. So how do we do this? So I want to give you very beautiful a condensed version of a lesson from Rabbi Nachman, Lakutei Moran, lesson 2. How do we prepare ourselves to feel this? Jerusalem is not a city. It's great if you go and you tour and you see the sights, and you should do that in Israel when you go visit Israel. God willing, we'll be all going there soon. But we don't just do it to tour. We're going there to have a spiritual experience and spiritual connection with God. So there are 3 ways that we must work on in order to have that experience. The first is to get rid of our love of money. Okay, believe it or not. The second is to get rid of immoral desires. And the third is to get rid of our over attachment to food. Very interesting. And we need to replace these 3 things with Chachma, Bina, and Das. Okay. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Now, this is a very short, condensed version of this lesson. So it's going to be, I'm going to explain to you the gist of it. How do we replace greed, okay, moral desires, and gluttony? How do we replace them with these 3 things and feel them in our heart? Okay, we go up, or the Jews used to go up, to the 3 festivals in Jerusalem. The 3 festivals known as the Shalosh Regalim, which means the 3 periods in which we are walking to Jerusalem. We're going up there. And these 3 festivals are Pesach, Passover, and that festival is an opportune time to rectify our relationship with money. Shavuot, okay, the giving of the Torah, that festival is the time to rectify our relationship to immoral desires. And Sukkot is the time where we rectify our relationship with food. Okay, everybody has these issues. There's not a person who has none of them, and most people have all of them to varying degrees. Okay. And by going up to Jerusalem to the festivals every year, for each of the 3 festivals, people would travel to Jerusalem from every area, okay, to celebrate the festivals and to bring their offerings. They would rectify these desires and they would gain this incredible awe of God in their hearts, and they would have wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. They would become wiser through the act of the festivals. And we still do this today, even though the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, isn't standing at this point. And even though we are celebrating it without going up to Jerusalem, we still have an opportunity spiritually to rectify this and to bring the concept and this idea of Yerushalem, okay, Yerushalayim, the fear and awe of God, and peace and wholeness and completion into our homes, into our hearts, into our families. And this is why the festivals, you know, the Yamim Tovim, have such a flavor for us. We taste it, we feel it. There's nobody who doesn't experience this when they celebrate and keep these festivals. Okay, now, King David brought the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which contained the Aron, the Holy Ark, which contained the tablets. He brought them to Jerusalem because he was upset that he lived in a palace and these were being kept they were being surrounded by curtains, and he wanted them to have a permanent home, and he wanted to build the first, what he thought would be the last, Bet HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, Jerusalem. And Natan the prophet told him first he couldn't build it, or he could build it, and then he couldn't build it. But finally, Hashem said, yes, you can build it, but you personally can't build it. Why? Because he had blood on his hands. He was a warrior. And even though he was a tzaddik and a holy man and a man filled with love for Hashem, for God and the Jewish people, he wasn't allowed to build it. And his son, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, was going to be the one who built it. And the commentator, Radak, says that it was going to be a house of peace, unity, healing, and forgiveness. And it couldn't be built, therefore, with iron. Okay, so we know that David made the blueprint for it, the architectural design, and it was built through quite mystical as well as practical means. We can do that another time. So his son Solomon built the temple, and it took 7 years. And the Zohar HaKodesh, the Holy Zohar, teaches us that it had the beauty of Gan Eden. There was an air about this first temple that was so holy and so beautiful that everybody who saw it was just in awe of it. And you can read about the architectural design in Tanakh, in the first book of Kings, and in the second book of Chronicles, if you're so interested. I started to read them. I wasn't very familiar with them, in all honesty. It's things I've read but skimmed through. And I'm looking forward to going back to reading them, to learning them. So there were many miracles in the temple and in the time of the first temple, and you can read about them as well. But the main thing that we need to know is that the Shekhinah, the indwelling presence of God, was dwelling there. And there were daily incense, meal, like grain, and animal offerings there. There was worship of God there. There was the Levium, the Levites had a choir where they sang in 72-part harmony. Can you imagine? I can't even imagine. And people, because of the temple, began to grow very wealthy, because having such holiness in your midst confers wealth on you. Even as you lose your incredible desire for money, you get showered with wealth, okay, because you've rectified it as well. So, and the money was being used for good things. So also I want to say something else, really important. The non-Jewish nations had people who would come to the temple to see it because it was a marvel. They would come there, and many of them were so moved by the holiness that they converted and they joined the Jewish people. And I want to say that, yes, we want to defeat our enemies, but we also really want that those who are good people and who believe in God, we want them to join us. We do. We don't want them to not join us. Judaism isn't a religion of blood. It is a religion of genealogy. But, Jewish blood isn't how necessarily we decide who's Jewish. Okay, you can get a DNA test and you can have a big percentage of Jewish blood, but if your mother isn't Jewish according to Jewish law, you're not Jewish. So we know that somebody who comes and joins us, a convert who comes and joins us, is fully Jewish, because that's the only other way you can be declared a Jew. We have 2 ways. Okay, so we also had the offerings, and the offerings were there, and you can read about it, to subdue our sort of animalistic leanings. And we also had incense. And again, Rabbi Nachman tells us, what is the incense offering? We say it every morning before our morning prayers, okay, currently now. But what is it? So it is healing, but what it is, again, is it gets rid of avarice in our hearts, the incense offering. Okay, it also brings healing, physically healing. I have to tell you, I try to say it every day. Shame on me, I don't always succeed, but I do try. It's very important. Okay. Anyway, King Solomon married a whole bunch of wives. And there was a problem. Okay. Even though he was wise and just, he thought that he could marry wives from all the other nations, and then all the other nations would make peace with Israel because he had one of their daughters. And so it was on a practical level for treaties, and on a spiritual level, it was to convert the nations, to bring them to God. But when King Solomon passed away, okay, and I want to tell you the first temple was completed in 2935, and King Solomon died in 2964. When he passed away, his wives reverted to idol worship. Not all of them, but most of them. Okay. So their children, those wives are no longer included in the Jewish people. Okay. It's very sad. And the people overall became less religious. And after he died, there was a civil war led by Jeroboam. And he was a leader in the Sanhedrin, and he divided Israel, and he took the north as his kingdom, and he called it the Kingdom of Israel. And he introduced idol worship there. Can you imagine? And the south, which was initially ruled by Solomon's son, Rehoboam, okay, giving you the English names, he called that the Kingdom of Judah, Yehuda, and the tribes there were Judah and Benjamin, with Jerusalem at the center. Okay, and I'm going to show you another map because it's important. So the red line is Israel today. Okay, the black line is Israel as it was, with the Kingdom of Israel on the top and the Kingdom of Judah here. Okay. So we can see that we were now a people divided, and there were 10 tribes here. And very briefly, the Assyrians invaded. The Assyrians were up here. Okay, they invaded. They invaded a couple of times, and they displaced the 10 tribes. They were exiled, the 10 tribes. And what they did was very interesting. What people do today, it happened in Greece, it happened in Pakistan and India. It happened all over the world. There was an exchange of people. Okay, it happened in the Americas. People would take the government, the newly formed government of United States, which wasn't the United States yet. They would take the Indian tribes, and they would move a tribe from the north that was used to snow and grew rice in Minnesota, and they would move them down south to New Mexico, and so on and so forth. They would mix them up. They would separate them from their land. And that was much easier to control people when you separate them from their land, because then they don't know how to grow crops. They don't have their sacred sites, and so on. And the Assyrians brought in what are called Kuthians, who were also called Samaritans. And the Samaritans also worshiped idols when they came, but they began to be attacked by the lions who lived in the north of Israel, and they felt that they should worship God. They felt that if they worshiped Hashem, the God of the Jews, that they would be protected. And so they did, but they rejected the oral law, and they rejected the leaders of the rabbis. And that's why, even though we have Samaritans in Israel, the country of Israel today, they aren't Jewish. They're Samaritans. Okay. Now, I want to go to see. Okay, I want to say that we begin with the prophets. Isaiah began his prophecies in 3142. And then the last of these 10 tribes, the final group of these people were exiled. Let me see, I'm going down because we can't do it. We have, 100 different events, but we're not going to do all of them. And we have the initial prophets. We have Malachi, okay, who his prophets were published at a later date, but some say that he prophesied about this time. And I want to just read what Malachi opens with at this point. It's so beautiful. The book of Malachi, I think it is in English. I'm not sure in English. And it opens with, I love you, says God. And if you will ask why, what did I do right that I deserve your love? God answers, my love is unconditional. No matter what you do and how far you stray from me, I love you anyway and always. And we should keep that in mind, because when we see that people have strayed in the past and the present, we all stray in our own personal ways. When we see that, we have to understand that we're still beloved by God. And, hopefully the whole world will realize that. It's important for the whole world to realize that. They also are loved by God. They are God's creations and he loves them, but we are God's special beloved. Okay. So, finally, the Babylonians came, they attacked, and there was a siege on Jerusalem. There's a lot of years intervening here. The walls of Jerusalem were penetrated, and the sacrifices ceased going in the temple. And in 3,338, which was 423 BCE, the first temple was destroyed. And let me stop sharing. Okay, the first temple was destroyed, and there was an exile to Babylon. And what's important to know is that the exile actually happened before that. Now, why was the temple destroyed? So there are many reasons. We could look at it militarily, we could look at it politically, we could look at it geographically, because that came into play. But the essence of the reason, our sages tell us, is that there was a portion of our people who had descended into idolatry and disrespect for human life and immorality and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into the details. And the spirituality couldn't be maintained. Remember, I said in the beginning, I talked about when you go to Israel, you're making an aliyah. We're going up, and every one of us is obligated to, when we get to the land, to go up spiritually as well. Okay? We're not just going up to the land. We're not just going up in an airplane. And we are not only supposed to go up spiritually, but we're supposed to keep going up. We're supposed to keep growing. We're not supposed to fall. We know that when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, we know that we won't fall any longer, because he will be there to guide us. He will be there looking at the good in us. He will be there helping us. Okay? It's quite beautiful what will happen. So anyway, the Jews were exiled to Babylon. We have the story of Daniel, which is really worth reading, the story of Daniel in your Tanakh. And we have the actual, the story of Purim, and the actual building of the second temple commenced while there were a significant number of Jews in exile. Now, what we have to understand is that there were Jews in Israel at the time as well. Not everybody was exiled. Some say the majority of the population was still left in Israel, and that they moved to various areas of Israel and they stayed there. Finally, with the story of Purim, we know that the Persians had conquered Babylon, and many Jews began to return. However, some stayed in Babylon. Now, very interesting. We'll get to it. We'll get to it next time. But why they stayed there. But in brief, Ezra was the one who led the Jews out of Babylon. Ezra was a prophet. He led the Jews out of Babylon, and he was as great in his generation as Moses was in his. He was very great. He led everyone back, but he kept the Torah scholars, those very strong and knowledgeable in Torah, in Babylon, and he brought back the simpler people to Israel. Why? Because he knew somebody had to stay in Babylon. They had established yeshivas there, communities there, and he knew that they were already very strong. They didn't necessarily have to be in the land to maintain that strength. But the Jews who were weaker in their connection, he wanted to bring them back because exile had taken a lot of their Jewish spirit away. And he knew coming back to the land would uplift them and would connect them to the Torah once more. It's really, it's very loving. It's very beautiful. So we see today that the longer we stay away from the land and the land's true purpose, especially without the Holy Temple, the weaker we all get, every single one of us. We have an exile mentality, okay? That in some ways carved upon our souls. And we want to get rid of that. We'll talk about that another time as well. Okay. So anyway, he founded the Anshe Knesset Gedola, which was a body of 120 Torah scholars and sages, and they were the ones who created the Siddur, the daily prayer services, and they embedded a lot of Kabbalah in the words of those prayer services, which is why it's important to say them every day as written, to not just speak to God in our own words, although that is equally as important. And they also canonized the Tanakh, what would become the Hebrew Bible. They chose which books would remain and which books would not. And there are books today that are not part of our Hebrew Bible because there's questions about whether they come from God or not, whether the prophecies come from God or not. Okay. Excuse me. So also, this is really interesting. Excuse me. I really find this so interesting. The sages prayed that the Jews would lose their taste for idol worship. They said, they keep descending into idol worship. Please, God, remove that from them. And Hashem did. And most Jews today, the vast majority, probably all, we don't have this drive to worship idols. Jews do seek other paths of spirituality, but that comes from a misplaced desire to worship God. But we don't seek the idols themselves, okay? Most Jews would not have an idol in their home, even if they're far removed from their Jewish identity. Some would, but even then it's not idol worship because they're not worshiping them. Okay. So, and by idols, I mean statues of Eastern deities and figures and so on. Okay. So then Herod began to build the second temple. I'm going to probably skip some things. And it was completed in 3412. Okay. And Ezra actually led the Jews the next year. The bulk of them came that year, right after the temple was built. After Herod's death, the country kind of descended into anarchy. The land was conquered eventually by Alexander the Great. Okay. And Alexander the Great initiated Hellenistic rule, Greek rule. The Greeks worshipped physical beauty, and they believed that the human mind was the pinnacle of everything, not God. They did believe in God, but they thought that humans were in a way higher. And they placed idols. They also believed in idols, and they placed them everywhere in the land. And they wooed the young Jewish men and women with luxuries, with sports, with feasts, parties, nightclubs, gymnasiums, athletic contests, and so on. They also wooed the intellectuals with debate, okay, because Jews love a good debate, and their philosophies. And they also wooed the Jews with music as well, okay. And sorry, okay, just want to make sure that I did this correct. Yes. And they were essentially turning the Jews into Greeks. They were Hellenizing them. And what happened is the Greeks knew how to do this. They were very smart. They banned 3 of the mitzvot of the Torah: Brit Milah, which is circumcision, Shabbat, the Sabbath, and Rosh Chodesh, the Jewish month. Why the Jewish month, the first day of the month? Because that's how the Jewish sages would determine what our calendar was. They needed to have that Jewish month and the new moon to see what our calendar was and to determine what the festivals would be. So it totally destroyed the fabric of Jewish life. Jews still kept doing these things, defiance, but it still destroyed them. Now, many Jews deserted Judaism, and many Jews lived semi-Jewish lives. They were proud to be Jews. They were proud to live in Israel, but they embraced Greek culture. So then I want to talk about the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, the Hasmonean revolt. They revolted against the practice of Hellenism and the desecration of the temple, which I won't get into the desecration of the temple. We don't have time. But they succeeded. Why did they succeed? They really were able to succeed. They succeeded because they fought for Hashem and his Torah. And the Romans saw the void. We have an oppression that started with heavy taxes and mass murder. And the Jewish people were slaughtered, okay? And the second Beit HaMikdash was eventually destroyed. But most of the Jews, by the way, I got the Greek and Romans backwards, just so you know. The Romans came last. The Romans didn't leave Israel, didn't leave all the Jews outside of Israel. They captured them. They took them into slavery. They took us from our land, but they didn't destroy all the Jews. There were Jews in Galilee. There were Jews in other areas. And next week, we are going to talk about the what happened with the Romans and the Jews dispersing and the Jews who remained in Israel. This is the story of our people up till the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash by the Romans. And it was a terrible destruction. And we are told by our sages that it happened. Why? Because the Jews weren't unified. They didn't have unity. They had sinat china, baseless hatred for one another. And I mentioned the names of the groups that the Jews divided into, and the groups all fought each other. And that's what brings about the destruction, not only of our relationship with Hashem and our relationship with others, but the relationship to the land.